Hello, folks. This is Rob Chappell, executive editor at Madison 365. It's been a tragic, challenging week for Madison as we navigate through the police killing of Corey Ruiz and its aftermath. There have been and will be calls for accountability, as well as calls to tear down and rebuild the systems that ultimately led to his death and which lead to harms against members of marginalized communities every day in ways that are far less known. Navigating through all of that together requires that we all be well-informed, I think, and operating with a common set of facts. So I just want to take a few minutes and address some possible misunderstandings and maybe some gaps in information that can hinder our collective healing. And so that when you're banging on the doors of authority, make sure you're banging on the right doors, right? So this will get a bit long, and we'll wander into the weeds a little bit, and there will be lots of initialisms, MPD and OIM and DCI and APM. I'll try to make it clear what I'm talking about and just ask that you kind of bear with me and get through it. I'm not going to talk up too much about the actual incident because you know about that. You've seen the video. You can debate it. You can decide whether it's justified or not or what. I'm focused more on the institutional response, the systems, right? And what will come next and how you can engage with that process. First, let's acknowledge that Madison Police Chief John Patterson said publicly the day after the shooting that the State Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI, is conducting an active homicide investigation. So, if it's a homicide investigation, why hasn't the officer been arrested? That's a good question. Some people have made kind of a deal about Patterson saying this is an ongoing homicide investigation, as if that's a meaningful thing. Like the word homicide, or that he declared it a homicide, that means something. That's a declaration or a distinction he can make. It's not really. Homicide just means one person killed another person. There are homicides that are not criminal acts. There can be an accidental homicide in a car accident, for example. There can be homicides in self-defense, right? Just calling it homicide doesn't mean it's a crime necessarily. Now, every time a police officer kills someone, it is a homicide, and the resulting investigation is a homicide investigation. Police rarely use that word in these cases, though, precisely because it carries that connotation of criminality. And sometimes there are homicides that might be criminal, but we don't know. And authorities can't determine without some thorough investigation. And in the United States, the government can't arrest and hold someone without charges. You can't arrest someone if you think there might be a crime and then hold them until you make that determination. Or I should say the government's not supposed to do that, right? But we've been kind of doing that with undocumented immigrants lately, haven't we? That's an entirely different issue. The fact is, police cannot arrest someone related to an incident, even a homicide, if they haven't yet determined whether the homicide was a crime. So, when can the officer be arrested? An officer can only be arrested if Dane County District Attorney Ishmael Ozan decides that he'd be able to prosecute the officer and secure a conviction. He can't do that until he gets the full investigative report. The State Department of Criminal Investigations, DCI, is doing that report. Now, I'm told that Ozan is engaged with that investigation, even sitting in on interviews with the officers. So when DCI does complete its report, he should be up to speed and able to make a decision relatively quickly. So why is DCI doing this investigation? First of all, whenever a police officer kills someone, that officer's employer cannot do the investigation. That's state law. A police department cannot investigate itself. That's state statute 175.47. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. That law doesn't say it has to be DCI, but in this case, it just can't be Madison Police Department, right? It could be Dane County Sheriff. It could be Capitol Police. It could be Verona Police Department. It doesn't matter. But DCI does most of these because they have the resources and the time to do them. They're not out patrolling for speeding tickets and stuff at the same time. Right? Now, here's my problem with DCI. They are a black box when it comes to information. Madison Police Chief John Patterson has promised transparency, but DCI is the least transparent state agency I've ever dealt with. They have a media relations phone number that nobody ever answers. They don't respond to emails. They don't respond to open records requests. They'll always send it off to some other agency. It is infuriating, but that's what it is. And if you don't like that we have to wait a long time, and we don't know how the investigation is going, Ishmael Ajan shouldn't necessarily be the target of your anger right now. It's Attorney General Joshua Call. His is the door you should be banging on right now if you want the DCI investigation to be moving along. He is the head of that State Department of Justice. He could move this investigation forward. He could even just make a statement of any kind, indicating that this is a bad thing that happened, or that the investigation is a priority, or we're committed to transparency, but he hasn't done any of that. So the lack of transparency just also means we just don't know how long it's going to take. But however long it does take, DCI will provide their findings to District Attorney Ozan, and he will then decide whether to prosecute or not. If he does not decide to prosecute, he must then make the full investigative report available to the public. Now, you should know the bar to prosecute a police officer for killing someone is insanely high. Thanks to a state law, and I'm not going to get into it right now, and United States Supreme Court precedent, anytime a police officer kills someone, all they have to say is that a reasonable person in that situation could have feared for their life or feared grave bodily harm. Not even that they felt that fear. They don't even have to say, I feared for my life. Only that a reasonable person might have feared for their life, or feared they were about to be seriously injured. So despite everything you've seen, I have to say it is exceedingly unlikely that this police officer will face criminal charges. And if he does, it's very unlikely that he would be convicted. So in the meantime, the police officer is still getting paid. Yes. And we can be mad about that, but that's not really anybody's fault. And there's not much anybody can do about it. That's because police are union workers. And the police union contract says police officers get leave with pay during the course of any investigation related to their duties. That's just a thing that was bargained into their contract. We can, dislike the police union. We can wish the police union had less power, but the fact of the matter is right now, that's the situation. So can the officer be disciplined or fired if they're not going to get prosecuted? Yes, I think so. Whether or not he's arrested or prosecuted, he could be disciplined or fired, especially if an investigation finds that he violated any Madison Police Department policies. Now, let's talk about that investigation. State law, as I mentioned before, requires an agency other than Madison Police Department to do a full investigation and provide that to the district attorney to decide whether to file criminal charges. That same law explicitly says that the agency may also do its own investigation as long as it doesn't interfere with the other DCI investigation. So in this case, that means Madison Police could conduct their own internal investigation with regard to policies, whether or not to fire the officer, which is different than whether or not to prosecute the officer, right? Madison Police could conduct their own internal investigation as long as it doesn't interfere with DCI's investigation. For purposes of that law, and we'll talk more about this law in a little bit, it seems like as if an investigation by the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, which we didn't have last time police killed somebody in Madison, OIM is what we're going to call that. It seems like that investigation is allowed by this law. It's not strictly internal, which is the whole point of the Office of the Independent Monitor. But it seems to me, not being a lawyer, that an Office of the Independent Monitor investigation would be allowed as an internal investigation under state law because it's internal to the city of Madison government, which means that Madison Police can and should share all the information, evidence, documentation, summary reports, video, and everything on and on. Everything they share with DCI, they should also share with OIM. I spoke with the independent monitor, Emily Glass, today, and she said she went to the police department Wednesday evening, a week ago, within about, she couldn't remember the timeline exactly, but within like 6 to 8 hours after the shooting, she went to the police department, to the police chief, and talked with him and two assistant chiefs, and said, "Give me everything you gave to DCI," which would include dash cam video. There would probably have been some reports by then, some written reports, I should say, some audio from radio traffic and things like that. All of that was turned over to DCI, and she asked them to give all that stuff to her as well, and they refused. And they just kept saying, "It's state law, we can. It's state law, we can't." She told me, and I talked to her just earlier today, she told me that neither Chief Patterson nor the assistant chiefs he had with him could actually state what that law was. I have asked the police department and the Madison City Attorney's Office what law they're referring to. And so far, my messages have been ignored. And if I get an answer back that contradicts anything I'm telling you today, I will update this, okay? Thing is, I know what law they're referring to. Remember, I mentioned it just a couple minutes ago. 175.47, and it doesn't say what they're saying that it says. If you're the kind of person who would want to look it up, again, it's 175.47. If you're also the kind of person who is going to look that up, you might also come across 165.87, but don't get distracted by that. Okay, that's only about body cameras. There's a whole chapter of state law about body cameras. There are no body cameras in this case, so 165.87 is irrelevant. Okay, let's focus on 175.47, which says a few things. As I said before, 175.47 says any officer-involved death must be investigated by two people, neither of whom work for the agency involved in the death. It also says the agency involved may do its own internal investigation as long as it doesn't interfere with the DCI investigation. I'm not a lawyer, as I mentioned, but I see nothing in that law preventing an agency like OIM from conducting its own investigation, and that might even be considered internal for purposes of the state law because it's internal within the city of Madison, like I said. And there's absolutely nothing in that law preventing MPD from sharing evidence with OIM. If there's another statute that I'm not aware of that I couldn't find, and MPD tells me that, I will come on here and I will clarify and explain. But from what I'm looking at, I don't see any reason that MPD could not share information with OIM. There are other laws that would prevent the public release of some of that information. I think there are several things that MPD wouldn't be allowed to give to me right now, for example. But that's a whole different section of state law and nothing that would prevent MPD from sharing information with OIM. So on Monday of this week, Director Glass issued a subpoena, which she has the authority to do, to Madison Police Department, demanding that Madison Police provide to OIM all the information and evidence it had given to DCI. The next day, Director Glass got a letter from DCI saying they were reviewing the subpoena, which means MPD is basically saying, because we turned all the evidence over to DCI, we no longer have control over it, which is, to use a term that I think is woefully underused these days, balderdash. DCI has no jurisdiction over Madison Police. And when Madison Police turns evidence over to DCI, it does not cease to exist within MPD. MPD has all the dash cam video and the written statements and all the audio and everything that they had a few days ago. There's no reason they couldn't give it to OIM. Chief Patterson, on the day after his officer killed Corey Ruiz, promised transparency and even said explicitly he wouldn't let active investigation become an excuse not to share information, which happens a lot. We are going to hold him to those promises. So what can the Office of the Independent Monitor do now? As I mentioned, she can issue a subpoena for information. Now, once she has all the information and does her investigation and puts out a report of some kind, she can't file charges or issue an arrest warrant. She can say out loud, I believe a crime was committed, and she can give all of her evidence to the district attorney, but he's not legally obligated to do anything with that information. The only report he really has to act on, either to prosecute or decline to prosecute, is that report from DCI we talked about before. What the OIM can do, however, is recommend officer discipline. And what they're really there for is to recommend changes to Madison Police policy. Because they're not only investigating what went wrong in this case, if anything, but they're looking to prevent things from going wrong in the future by recommending policy improvements, changes to training, stuff like that. Madison police can then choose whether to take those recommendations or not, right? So what's all this about the Common Council and OIM? You've heard you're supposed to go to the city council meeting on August 4th and stand up for the OIM, and they want to take it away. They want to kill it. They want to defund it. So we're just going to walk through that really quick, okay? As you might remember, the Independent Monitor was created in 2020. So it's almost 6 years ago, on the recommendation of an ad hoc police civilian oversight committee. That committee was formed after Madison police officer Matt Kenney shot and killed Tony Robinson in 2015. See how these things work? One thing directly leads to the other. All of these things are connected, right? Anyway, the Common Council created the office through an ordinance in 2020. An ordinance is just like a local city law, basically. And this law says this office now exists, and its function is to monitor the police department through data collection, response to complaints, and so on. And then separately, the city budget includes funding to fund the office and to make it run. The first few years, if we're honest, did not go well. I would just say also that ordinance also establishes the Police Civilian Oversight Board, PCOB, which is the sort of the board of directors which oversees the Office of Independent Monitor. PCOB is completely independent from the city, and OIM is an independent city agency, which means, which will become relevant in a moment, the people who work in that office are city employees. That'll become relevant in a second. Anyway, the first few years of that office did not go well. The person that had to run it was not really effective. Took a long time to kind of ramp up. Just didn't really do much for like 4 years. Never produced a report that I'm aware of. Also didn't get much in the way of resources, frankly. So that person left last year and was replaced by the interim police monitor, Aramika Glass. She took the job in December 8th. She took the job. She started. So what's the deal with all these amendments everybody's talking about? The long and short of it is there were a few proposed changes to the way the OIM and PCOB worked. And some supporters were saying they would destroy the office, take away all the independence, put it under the mayor's control, defund it completely. All of that is a little bit hyperbolic, I think. But there were some changes proposed that would have been meaningful. And the bottom line right now is that the Common Council leadership has kind of read the room, so to speak, and has more or less dropped all of those proposals. So we're just going to go into a little bit of what those proposals were, just because some of them might come back in some form at some point in the future. And I want you to be aware of sort of where they were sitting between Common Council and PCOB and OIM at this moment. There are some on the council and in city government who just never liked the idea of the independent monitor. Just didn't like the idea of the police having anybody looking over their shoulder, right? Especially didn't like it after the first monitor did a pretty poor job. There was a proposal at one point to defund the office, but that didn't go anywhere and isn't on the table now. Nobody's talking about defunding the office. Some people would like to give it more funding than it has, but nobody's talking about zeroing it out of the budget right now. There are some on the council who really focus on city government policy and how those policies work, especially as relates to employment. Right? I mentioned everybody who works at OIM is a city employee. As you might know, municipal employment is pretty rigid. How much you get paid, it's all on a spreadsheet. You can't negotiate your pay, really. How you move up the ladder of to see more senior levels, the hours you work, what equipment you use for your work. It's all strictly regimented, which has, again, something to do with union contracts, but also just a desire for the government as an employer not to show any favoritism. Right? In the private sector, you can negotiate a raise or a new title. You can put in a few extra hours here and there to get ahead. You can knock off early for a dentist appointment. You can take a work call on your personal cell phone. Not a big deal. Like it or not, municipal employees can't do those kinds of things. And a lot of these things are governed not by law necessarily, but by administrative policy memos, APM. Without getting into anything too specific, there were apparently some things happening at the OIM early this year, early in 2026. There were at least perceived to be a bit more freewheeling private sector type things I'll give you one example. The data analyst who works there said publicly that he'd been putting in extra hours, right? He wasn't complaining about it. He wasn't trying to admit to anything wrong. He was more like saying, I'm so committed to this work that I've been working late sometimes to get it done. But when you're a city employee, you can't just work late and not write it down anywhere the way you can in the private sector. So it seems he just kind of didn't realize that. There was also an allegation, you might remember this, that he was mishandling data because he used his own laptop, downloaded an unimproved software tool to analyze the data. That turned out to be more or less just completely false. Balderdash, as I mentioned before. And the Wisconsin Journal had ended up having almost to fully retract a news story they wrote about that because it was all completely wrong. They were fed bad information. And that's just that entire line of inquiry, I think we can dismiss. But still, there are rules about employment, and there were some misunderstandings about those rules in OIM earlier this year, which prompted some of the council to write amendments or changes to the ordinance that created the OIM. The primary thing, and the primary reason for writing these amendments that was given publicly, was to clarify that OIM, even though it's independent, even though the I there in OIM stands for independent, that OIM is subject to those APMs. And some supporters of the OIM and members of the PCOB were kind of like, no, OIM can't be subject to any city policies and still be called independent. And the only response to that is, well, you have to break off and become your own separate entity with some nonprofit funding or something, which is not without precedent, honestly. When I first started working at Overture Center in 2008, it was still a city department. We were all city employees. And it became clear that you can't operate a major performing arts center with all those employment restrictions, right? So we broke away and became a private nonprofit organization, and that became much more successful. That's probably not practical for OIM. Okay, it's a completely different thing. And most supporters of OIM don't even want that. They're fine with the way it is. I think most OIM supporters, it's more like, look, you have an interim director who's been on the job like 6 months, more like 3 months when these amendments were written. Give her a little time to learn the policies. Right? If you hired a new director for any other agency, for the streets department or the parks department, whatever, and they didn't know every city policy right away and they made some mistakes, you wouldn't be writing new laws that apply only to that agency, right? So those amendments related specifically to the ABMs, pretty easy to drop those off and just say we're just gonna learn the policies and do better, no big deal, right? Now there was another amendment related to OIM's relationship with the city attorney's office, which gets way, way, way too far into the weeds. But the thing to know is that now, currently, in the current ordinance, OIM can retain its own attorney if it ends up in a position where it's in opposition to the police department, right? Like if, say, the police department, for example, resists the subpoena that Enrique Glass gave them. OIM can hire its own lawyer to enforce that subpoena because the city attorney will defend the police department in a case like that. So the city attorney can't be the attorney for both of those oppositional agencies, right? So that was another amendment. Another amendment would have required more regular reports to the Common Council, which I can understand that being onerous for such a small staff. There's only 2 people that work in that office. Frankly, I wouldn't be opposed to more reports just because as a journalist and I always err on the side of more information, more transparency. Another amendment would have placed a sitting alder, a member of the Common Council, as a member of the PCOB. PCOB members really bristled against that one because PCOB is supposed to be independent, and they were saying even just the presence of one city council member, one elected city council person on our board, is in the way for us. That interferes with our independence, and that's too many city fingers in the whatever the metaphor is, in the pot. I guess I don't know. So that amendment has also been dropped. So for right now, there's not going to be any changes to the OIM or the PCOB ordinance. There is a Common Council meeting on August 4th, on Tuesday, for security reasons. That city council meeting is entirely virtual now. It's going to be on Zoom. You can make public comment on Zoom. The finance committee met earlier this week and didn't allow public comment as it was supposed to. 24 people registered to to speak specifically about funding OIM, not anything to do with these amendments, but just giving OIM more funding. Well, right now, OIM gets a little over $400,000 a year. Many people have said if it's going to oversee the police department, the entire police department, it should have at least 1% of the police department's budget, which would be $1 million. So people were trying to advocate for that at the finance committee level. And then as the executive operation budget debate ramps up in October, people are going to call for that. Finance committee, 24 people registered to speak. None of them were able to speak. The city is telling me that it was just an IT issue. Zoom is pretty simple. I don't know what the IT issue would that be. Anyway, I did confirm with the city today that at that city council meeting on Tuesday, if you register to speak, you'll be able to speak on Zoom. We'll see if they hold that up. So that's everything we know for now. To recap real quick, DCI is currently investigating the police shooting of Corey Ruiz. OIM is also trying to investigate. The MPD is not cooperating with the OIM investigation, even though state law says that they can. Once DCI's investigation concludes, could take a while, Dane County DA Ishmael Ozan will decide whether to prosecute the officer. Chances are he won't, because he can only prosecute cases that he thinks he can get a conviction. And the law makes a conviction in these cases nearly impossible. In the meantime, the vigil remains at the corner of Williamson and Baldwin, where Corey's life ended. People continue to call for accountability. And I continue to call for transparency. I will keep pushing for that and will continue to provide to you whatever information I'm able to get out of the police or the state or anybody else. In the meantime, continue to follow Madison 365. The website's madison365.org. All your local media channels. Listen to the 365 Amplified podcast every Friday for the latest on this and all the other news that's happening every day. Wherever you get your news, we'll be there. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.